All right, folks, take four here. The Screencast-O-Matic keeps crashing on me. That is the free program that I use to record all these videos. So I guess it's true what they say. You do get what you pay for. And that's the third time I've made that joke. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about the war's final stages, the end of the war, the fall of Richmond, Sherman's march to the sea, and surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. And that means that tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday, tomorrow, which is Wednesday, and then Thursday, are your last 2 days for new content, which means you have all of Reconstruction to learn in 2 days. And as some of you might remember, I kept saying I think Reconstruction is probably even more important than the Civil War because it really leads to what we are today as a modern society. And as you might be able to imagine, 2 days is not enough time to teach you all about Reconstruction. So I will have additional information that you can use to learn about Reconstruction. I know everybody is using Khan Academy for math right now. Khan Academy also has a AP American History course, which is really good and gets into Reconstruction a little bit. And so while after Thursday I can't make you guys read or learn anything, I can certainly beg you. So I'm begging you, whatever extra materials I give you regarding Reconstruction, please read them and learn them. They will make you smarter, better informed citizens of our country. All right, with that being said, and my minute and a half soliloquy over, let's go ahead and get started on our PowerPoint here, and let's cross our fingers and hope it does not crash again. Excuse me. All right. So total war strikes the South. So total war is the systematic destruction of an entire land, which is really what you watched yesterday in your video about Sherman. It's not just the army that they're fighting against, but they're destroying anything that could help that army. So remember, in the South, they've been cut off on the Atlantic coast by blockades. The Mississippi River has completely been cut off. And so this total war would really be effective because all of their agricultural products are grown domestically and all of their finished products are manufactured domestically. So if the North can burn their fields and destroy their factories, what else do they have, right? And so in March 1864, Lincoln says, it's been a couple months since I, changed it up at general. So he appoints Ulysses S. Grant as head of the Union Army. And Grant has a two-part plan, which he thoroughly believes will bring about an end to the war. And that is for him to lead 115,000 troops to take the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, which, if we remember, was a huge point of pride for the Confederacy. At all costs, they wanted to protect Richmond. So Grant felt like if he could take Richmond, that would basically be the death blow to the Confederate Army. And then at the same time, he would send William Tecumseh Sherman on a total war campaign across the Deep South, again, to destroy their morale, to cut them off from the supplies that they needed and were making domestically. All right. Oh, and here's Grant in his general's uniform. Pretty normal looking president, I have to say. So congratulations, Ulysses S. Grant, perhaps our first conventionally normal looking president. All right, get these notes down. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so the Wilderness Campaign was what the series of battles that Grant fought against Lee outside of Richmond were called. Again, Grant brought 115,000 troops. Lee had 60,000 troops. Just like in every battle, practically every battle, Lee was outnumbered, and he made great use of the numbers that he did have. Grant refused to lose, however. Even with the dramatic loss of life, Grant continued to press and continued to try and break the Confederate lines. In all, 50,000 Union troops were lost in this campaign. And Grant is quoted as saying, "I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer." Basically saying we can't do any more of this attack, retreat. We have to continue to press south. That's the only way that this war will end. We have the numbers, we have the resources. It will be costly, but it will bring about a resolution. Northerners didn't like this, right? They felt like, okay, we kind of have them on the ropes already. Let's be conservative in our attacks. And they started calling Grant the Butcher because of the huge loss of life to his own men. They started calling on Lincoln to replace generals because that was the fashionable thing to do. But Lincoln responds, "I can't spare this man. He fights." Essentially saying, I finally have a general who's willing to push the offensive and hopefully bring about an end to this war. I'm not going to replace him. And he doesn't. All right, get these notes down, please. All right. So in the election of 1864, put on your way back hats here. At the beginning of this war, when Lincoln originally calls for soldiers, he's calling for them on 3-month contracts. 3 months. That's how long a lot of Northerners believe that this war will last. Here we are 3.5 years later, and it's looking like, yeah, maybe it might go on. Who knows how much longer? People in the North are tired of the war. They feel like this war should have been over a long time ago. And if it's not over by now, let's make it over. Let's come up with a resolution and sign a peace agreement with the Confederacy. But then Sherman takes the city of Atlanta, Georgia. David Farragut takes Mobile Bay, which was the last Confederate port on the Mississippi. And with those two victories, the Anaconda Plan has truly succeeded. And this happens just 3-4 months before the election of 1864. Northerners believe that they can win after Atlanta and after Mobile Bay. And Lincoln is reelected with 55% of the popular vote and 91% of the electoral vote. Lincoln interpreted his victory as a sign from voters to end slavery permanently. Essentially, he had banned slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation. The voters had reelected him, so clearly they endorsed his decision to end slavery. And so he's going to make it permanent by advocating for the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which prohibits slavery. Now, adding it as a constitutional amendment is very important because if you would have just left it with the Emancipation Proclamation, or if you would have made some executive order, it would have been temporary, and the next president who came in could have changed that. But by putting it on the books as an amendment to the Constitution, as we know, it's a very difficult process to add an amendment, perhaps an even more difficult process to add an amendment, changing a previous amendment. And so this, thankfully, has prohibited slavery till today in 2020. And hopefully, barring any wild shift in social thinking, will ban slavery for all time. So Lincoln does win re-election, and he will see the end of the war within a year of his re-election. So in Sherman's March to the Sea, which was the subject of yesterday's video, the Union, again, was just determined to break the will of the South. So Sherman and his men become destroyers. They conquer Atlanta, and before leaving it, they basically burn it to the ground. They raze the entire city. Sherman and his men are then going to march from Atlanta to the Atlantic coast. And as they are going, they are burning cities and farmland, destroying railroads. And this became known as Sherman's March to the Sea. And he would then continue this path of destruction heading north through the Carolinas. I talked about this at the beginning, but this was a crippling blow to the South's ability to resist and continue their rebellion against the Union. All right, next. So then we get to the fall on Richmond. Again, Grant and his troops have been sieging Confederate lines outside of Richmond for weeks. He finally breaks Lee's line, forced to retreat on April 2nd, 1865. Upon hearing of Lee's defeat and the advancing Union Army, Confederate President Davis orders all ammos, bridges, documents, anything that could be helpful to the Union be destroyed, and then him and his cabinet flee the city. This is certainly a symbolic symbol that the Confederacy had lost the war, right? Richmond was their crown jewel. It's what they wanted to keep above all else. And here we have the president and his cabinet abandoning the capital. There's actually a surreal account that happens just 2 days after Davis leaves the city, where Lincoln actually goes to Richmond and walks through the abandoned city. And he actually goes to Davis's abandoned house and sits in his office chair where Davis would have made a lot of his executive decisions as the chief executive of the Confederacy. And he's not quoted as saying anything while being there. It's just recounted that he sat there for a long time with a very pensive look on his face. I would imagine trying to empathize with Davis and trying to understand the chair that he sat in, and the fact that him and Davis were the two men tasked with making the really tough decisions during this war. This sort of empathy and understanding is going to go a long way when we get to Reconstruction, and the understanding of why the South did what they did. At the Appomattox Courthouse, General Grant accepts the surrender of General Lee, and the terms of surrender are actually pretty generous. Confederate troops can keep their small firearms, so not cannons, but basically everything else. Confederate officers can keep their horses. No Union citizen or Confederate citizen would harass Confederate troops returning home. Basically, they would be free to just go home and return to their normal lives. And Grant also offered 25,000 rations of food for Lee to feed his men as they were surrounded at Appomattox. This leads to a couple important questions, perhaps the most important being, how do we treat the Confederates now, right? They just rebelled against us. We just fought the bloodiest war in American history for 4 years, and now they're back and they're a part of our country again. How do we make this work? And so the toll of the war, it was a costly war. More lives were lost in the Civil War than in any other conflict in American history. More than 600,000 soldiers died. The war cost billions of dollars. In the South, thanks to all the battles and, of course, Sherman's march to the sea, cities, farmlands were destroyed, and it's going to take years and a massive national effort to rebuild the South and their economy. It also had some other impacts that aren't directly a result of the fighting, but the war had strengthened the power of the federal government. Lincoln had really accumulated and used a lot of power during the Civil War, and it clearly asserted that the federal government was more powerful and their authority was greater than states' government. Again, that was part of what this war was being fought about: states' rights versus federal government's rights, and the federal government, the Union, wins. And that is pretty much how it resides now. There is more power in the federal government than states' governments. Of course, millions of African Americans are freed from slavery. They're not free from discrimination. They're not free to make a lot of decisions and have economic opportunities and education, but they are free from the bondage of slavery, which is, of course, the most important first step. So then the question is, what next? How do we reconstruct this nation and also fairly deal with the rebellious South, right? These guys are rebels. They tried to destroy this country and tear it in two for the institution of slavery. How do we fairly punish an action like that without creating further division, right? Because if we punish them too harshly, this is just going to happen again in 10, 20 years. And if we don't punish them at all, perhaps this will also happen again in 10, 20 years because they feel like they can do it. So this is going to be a really tricky balance that Lincoln is considering immediately, and that will be the subject of our next two videos. Hopefully my video didn't crash this time and I can upload it. Be on the lookout for your assignments tomorrow. Make sure you answer today's question on my school. And yeah, that's it.